Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to SJS Wright's panel discussion on educators' perspectives on Africa and African American history. I'm Shawnee Smith, founder of SJS Wrights and a Toastmaster. I will introduce our panelists who are educators, authors, and change makers. Our first panelist is Dr. Yvonne Johnson, who is a graduate of Clark Atlanta University, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in History. After matriculation at Clark Atlanta University, she obtained a Master's of Arts in Teaching and Special Education K through 12 from the University of Memphis and a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction from Capella University. She currently serves as a Special Education Advisor with Shelby County Schools in the Division of Exceptional Children, where she supervises special education classes at several schools. Dr. Johnson is a co-author of The Ride of Pride, a children's book that tells the story of African American inventors and how we use their inventions daily. In addition, she is the author of Manifested Dreams, which depicts the journey of an African American family through slavery to an allegedly post-racist American society. Dr. Johnson is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and Phi Delta Kappa Incorporated, and she volunteers with several organizations with the Memphis, Tennessee community. Our next panel guest is Dr. Sonia Johnson. Dr. Johnson is co-author of the children's book, The Ride of Pride. She has worked for over 18 years as an educator. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry from Clark Atlanta University and a Master's of Arts in Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Memphis and a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction from Capella University. She believes in living by both of Clark Atlanta University's mottos, I'll find a way or make one, and culture for service. Our third panelist is Mr. Johnny Faison Jr., who is a native of Dayton, Ohio. He has worked for 19 years in early childhood education, helping the next generation become lifelong learners. Mr. Faison's work with students in the inner city and rural areas, giving him expertise to initiate educational programs, including early childhood inclusion and Leopard Leaps parent programs. He takes pride in seeing his former students becoming productive adults, raising their families, and helping their communities. In his spare time, he enjoys reading and listening to music. Our fourth is Mr. Cowan Amayabu. Mr. Amayabu earned a Bachelor's of Science in Social Science Education from University of Central Florida and has been a secondary educator for 11 years. He has instructed students in subjects including American history, American government, world history, geography, and psychology. Mr. Maibu is an author of 5 books, which discuss the African and African American experience. In his spare time, he enjoys performing the spoken word and participating in outdoor activities. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for our panel discussion, we'll have a total of 5 questions. And would you please limit your response to 2 minutes? I'll call on the first person, and if the first person is not ready, he or she has the option to pass to another person. Any questions?
Gotcha.
So our first question is, what influenced you to research and write about Africa or African American history? And we'll start with Dr. Yvonne Johnson.
So what influenced me to write is basically, I just want to share history with others. I want to encourage others to learn more about themselves. And as you stated earlier, I was a history major. History always fascinates me, and I feel a lot of people don't know their history. So I started writing not necessarily in the ambition of becoming an author, but just to share our history with others.
Thank you. Mr. Mayable?
Okay. Well, first, I would just like to say it's an honor to be on the podcast with you all, and I'm excited to hear about all of your work. I just would like to encourage you guys all to continue because our children are impressionable and they definitely need it. What influenced me to research and write about African and African American history? Essentially, I personally embody. I'm both. I'm Nigerian American. My father came over early or late '70s, early '80s, and so I'm at a crossroads essentially between both cultures. I understand exactly what happened with African Americans, and I understand the traditions that come from Africa in a sense. So I honestly feel like you can't have history without people. People themselves are essentially the history. Without the people, you can't have history. So what was the essential spark was knowing what the experience of African Americans here in America, the lack of history. It got me actually encouraged to take a trip back to Africa. And once I got to Africa and got a chance to experience Africa, not just, the fantastical Africa, but I actually got to spend time with my family. I didn't want to come back. It actually took me to think of my mother here in America, leaving her, which made me decide that I would come back because, going over to Africa, you actually learn that, hey, you know, you can go someplace where you don't have to experience the things that we're forced to undergo here in America. On the continent, you can actually have a black president every year. You can have, all of the officials look essentially like you, and you're not, you know, played down. So, have I reached my 2 minutes?
Yes.
Just about. But essentially, I felt like I personally embodied. I stood at a crossroad. There are a lot of stories that that I've been given from the continent of Africa that I can relay to Black Americans, and a lot of stories from Black Americans that I can relay to the continent, and not just stories, but anything from cuisine, food to just our culture in general. So that's why I decided to write about African and African American history.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayable. Dr.
All right. So, what inspired me to basically research and write about our history? Even as a little child, a little girl growing up, I can truly say I was engulfed by my parents and my relatives, just hearing stories of when they were growing up. I'm fortunate enough to our grandmothers will be turning 100 in September, so her alone is thank you. Her alone is 100 years worth of history. She talks about the Spanish flu. I mean, she talks about history even from what her mother and father instilled in her. So just talking to her and having regular Sunday conversations is history within itself. My parents basically, we will watch documentary like The Ride of Pride, not The Ride of Pride, I'm sorry, Why We Can't Wait, Roots, to other people, like, why would you want to watch those trauma tales all the time? But if you don't know, if you don't understand, I'll forever forget what's going on. And history truly is repeating itself, and people don't realize that. I volunteered as a child at the Civil Rights Museum. That was my volunteering. So just wanted to know about who I am, because so many people I come in contact with don't want to know the history. Like, I don't want to tell my trilogy stories. I don't want to know. But my thing is, I'm constantly learning about myself, constantly learning about the hero, the unwritten heroes, the unwritten tales that we don't want to share. We're so used to being traumatized and wiping things on the carpet that there are so many things that we have that we should be honored and feel inspired about, that these stories are not told. We always have the Dr. Kings, we always have the Malcolm X's, but what about people that we don't hear about, those unwritten stories? So that makes me want to know, because we're always told that we were the underdogs in life. Why not understand and appreciate our history, not only from here in America, but also in Africa? So those should give the thing. So one day, maybe if we instill this into our children, maybe one day we could be reading about them in books.
Definitely. Thanks so much.
Okay. Well, my influence is from two separate parts. First part, as Dr. Sonia said, my grandmother. She's 92, getting ready to be 93 in July, and hearing stories from childhood days, hearing stories from, about her relatives and things that they accomplished in those days. You know, as an early child, in my, like, I remember being 4 or 5 hearing those stories, and that leads me to, a lot of times in my lifetime, some of my greatest discoveries have come from moments of mischief. So I was, in my parents' room messing around as a kid, and I saw their old Jet magazine pile. And I saw, like, and I dropped the box, and it flipped open to this picture that shocked me. That kind of gave me chills, because it was a picture of Emmett Till. And it made me go, whoa, what happened to him? Wait, what is this? What is that about? So, that age old word of why came up, and I started asking questions, and that was my influence into it. It was just literally along the path, things happen, you talk to people, you find out things. And, once I figured out that, as everyone has mentioned, the history that we're told is not necessarily the history that happened. And once you find out, about the way that you were before slavery and, any kind of conquest of colonial means, you find out that your people were powerful. And if you're a child, as Ms. Mwabi said, and Dr. Sonia, it's like you feel that representation matters. And once you see that somebody that looked like you was once in power, was once a ruler, was once a king or queen, it makes you want to know more. And I found that a lot of my friends, they were not being told these things I was. So I was, decided to become the conduit and start giving those stories out, about these things that I used to hear and what people would tell me. So I found out that it helped everybody around me. So, that's how I found out about that, and that's what influenced me, my grandmother and the Jet magazine.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Now we're moving on to our second question. What were some of the hurdles you had to overcome to publish your books or any other writing projects? And now we'll start with Dr. Sonia Johnson.
I think the first major hurdle we had when we first put, because with the Writer Pride, we actually released the book twice. So the first hurdle was finding a publishing company that we felt like we were getting the biggest bang from our book. And even with that, we've learned a lot of lessons dealing with our publishing company. So that was the first hurdle, I can truly say. And then the second one was just getting support and getting the word out there. It's amazing, especially with the first book, how many people were looking at our project like, oh, that's cute. oh, all right, y'all wrote a little book, and put little in front of things, that's kind of like a, a jab sometimes. But once and I had to give it to my sister. The second time we published in 2017, we were hitting the ground running. We were contacting newspapers all over America. We were contacting news stations, just like, this is our book. We want to get the word out. We basically have one of we call her our play sister. When I say she was spreading the word almost all throughout Arkansas, she was hitting the ground running for us. So just the word of mouth, getting support from people, and then all of a sudden it just kind of hit the ground and people know more about it. So I truly say find a publishing company and just getting the word out there and getting the support, because I tell people all the time, it doesn't, even if you don't buy it, at least share the information, encourage somebody else to purchase it. Sharing the information is free. So that was just some of the major hurdles we encountered.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Sonia Johnson. Mr. Johnny Faison.
Okay, well, the first hurdle was, as they said, finding support, because a lot of times when, our literary circles in our communities aren't as big as they used to be. So you don't have a large network of people who you can go to for things that you need, any kind of support. And the second major hurdle was, the publishing aspect of it, because I had to self-publish my books, because a lot of times, especially like, I don't know if a lot of, my story, I can only tell my story, but a lot of times once people, when they hear me, they hear one thing, but then when they see me, it's another thing. So a lot of times you talk to the publishers, everything's going well, and then when you finally meet them, you see it, and they see you, it's like, oh, you're writing that book, you're doing that, really, you know. So that was hurdle number two, and then hurdle number three was just getting people to take what you do seriously and to value literary content. Everybody wants to hear the latest song, they want to see the latest video, they want to wear the latest clothes, but to read the latest book is not that high on the list anymore. So it really has to be an organic following of people that you develop and cultivate that, curate that following that can help you propel to that next level. So I would say, number one, support. Number two, I don't want to use the R word, but we know what that word is. And then number three is just people taking literacy serious.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Yvonne Johnson.
Okay, so the biggest hurdle for me when I wrote my second book, I self-published, and honestly, I think that's the best option because you actually see your revenue. So the first hurdle was just trying to find someone that can match my ideal of a cover for my book. I used someone I didn't know, and it was kind of hard for us to have a clear understanding of what I was asking for. And as he stated before, this exposure is a big thing, getting people to buy into your idea. And the third thing for me is because when I wrote Manifested Dreams, I had the idea that I wanted to get my books, not also the Rite of Pride, into schools. And I'm living in the state of were the first ones to state that teaching critical race theory um, is against the law. So at first I was like, well, that wouldn't affect me. But when they talked about removing Ruby Bridges from the library, I was like, how would they perceive my book? So that was a major obstacle for my book, but I'm not getting discouraged. I'm continuing to press on. So those are my three obstacles for publishing my book.
Thank you, Dr. Yvonne Johnson. Carolyn Miley. You're on mute.
Okay. Definitely, I would like to piggyback off of Mr. Johnny and Dr. Yvonne. Essentially, the biggest hurdles that I experienced were definitely sending out to publishers, and the fact that our stories, African American stories, aren't really sought after in this culture. So it will be, a constant, denial, or even just going to different publishing companies and, expecting something and, getting the big letdown. So very quickly you learn that you're going to have to do it yourself. And I remember one conversation with a literary agent, a white literary agent, who suggested that I take my book to London and then shop it around to the publishing companies there. And I thought that was I thought that was ridiculous and just eye-opening, that our works are, that Black Americans actually have to go outside the country to make something of themselves before we can make something of ourselves here. So self-publishing became the next best option. And then from there, it was just producing the content that we need, because the content that African Americans, we need definitely a library to solve the issues that we face here in this country. And what the American discourse gives us is essentially what white America, the picture, or how we fit in white America's box, and essentially the stories that they will accept from us, as the only stories that they accept from us are what they see us as, will be the minstrel show. And that's all we get. We get the Sambos, the Mammies, the tragic mulatto, the black brute. We get all those same stereotypes over and over and over, and it doesn't quite help us in our education to educate our children on issues that we may be facing in our culture. So I think coming up with the necessary or relevant content has been the next hurdle. For example, there's only so many Boys in the Hood movies that we can make, or there's only so many drug dealer movies that we can make of ourselves. At this point, what's going on here in Maryland, in Baltimore, if you have 10 homes, in Baltimore, nine times out of 10, our children are coming out of single parent homes. So the destruction of the Black family is a concept, or is something that is really affecting Black Americans. And that's a story that needs to be spoken about. The different parts of that. The Black family is something that so the content will be the next hurdle that I definitely say is something to overcome.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Maibu. And with that, we can lead off the third question. In some states, there are laws that are limiting or preventing teaching about the contributions of Africans and African Americans. When and how should parents introduce African American history to their children?
And I lead off on this one?
Yes, sir. You may lead off. And remember, 2 minutes.
Okay. 2 minutes. Okay. Watching the clock this time.
Yes.
Well, as a father, in my experience, I really have this thing where it's the parent's job to teach the child how to love. And I think before you can teach a child about their culture, you have to teach them first how to love themselves, how to love their mother and their father, they can check out that love, the love between their siblings, the love between them and their cousins. And then the outer world, then they would learn a love for, then you can teach them the love for our outside culture. When we're talking about essentially how history is kind of are pushed on to our children, we definitely have. I'll just speak from my personal experience. I really feel like I have to give my daughter all the tools she needs, because I don't expect her to learn them in school or in the outside world, and I don't expect them to give it to her in a way that I feel will be something that I would accept. As it comes down to how this country has now come up with the term of critical race theory, I would say that African Americans have always experienced this type of situation in public education. And, from the time of W.E.B. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson, when they came out with the Negro National Anthem, it was because we weren't experiencing, or we didn't have African American history in our schools. And I would say, if we fast forward till today, every generation has to fight for their own freedoms. We're still having to fight the same battle. So critical race theory and how it has come out and been, it seems like it is a rallying cry, an old rallying cry, just like Drain the Swamp. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to us to teach our children African American history. So I think I kept that at 3. So
Thank you so much, Mr. Meyer. Dr. Yvonne Johnson, your thoughts?
I think it's stated before, it's important for us to teach our own history. We can't rely on the educational system to teach our history. So as Sonia stated before, our parents, we used to watch Why We Can't Wait and several other documentaries. And after you watch them, have the children do their own research. And what I appreciate about this lady, she had her son purchase my book, and he had to write a book report. Text me the book report, and I really appreciate, because he really enjoyed the book, and it shows that he read it. So we have to do things like that, and several hidden gems in our various cities, and just take our children and say, okay, what did you learn about this? What stood out? And have them analyze, and just teach our own history. I think that's very important, and we can't be afraid of our own history. And I know I was talking to a lady, and she was like, "Oh, your book is going to be controversial." So, and it really isn't, but it's a shame with this critical race theory. It's making us afraid to even talk about our history. So we have to go back and just teach the basics of our history, and just take personal field trips within our cities and teach our own children about our own history.
Thank you so much. Mr. Johnny Payson.
Okay. Well, when it comes to critical race theory, or CRT as they call it, 2 words come to mind. I might ruffle some feathers here, but 2 words come to mind: white guilt. They don't want to feel guilty about things that Nana and Pawpaw might have done back in the day, because as we know, with our internet age, the ability to find information is limitless. So it's a lot of stories, a lot of things, a lot of situations coming out from the past that people did not know. And a lot of times people, they feel guilty about things that happened back then. And as you mentioned with Drain the Swamp, another one of their great sayings is that, that, as they call them, their great sayings, make America great again. In my opinion, that means rewind. That means bring us back to about 1952, 53, you know. And during that period, yeah, you couldn't talk about Black history. So what they felt like they had to do was create a way, as they said, as you all were saying, to scare us from talking about it. So they came with a term that they've just thrown out there for everybody to discuss, even what it means, as a deflection, as I call, as we call it in Dayton, Ohio. They're spinning you around. You know what I mean? To make you argue about everything except the stories. You understand? It's a deflection technique, and it's working masterfully because everybody that I talk to about it, they have no idea what it means. You can't get to a solution on it, but because you can't even find out and define what it is. So, in my opinion, I just feel like if you're the parent, you shouldn't even look for the schools to teach your child about Black history. It's not going to happen because being that I'm from Ohio, I worked, taught, learned around a lot of different nationalities, and one thing is for sure, they're not going to teach you your history. That's for sure. So it's up to you as a parent to find those hidden gems, find those places, those people that know these stories, and teach these things to your kids along with the filter of, you know, now when you learn this, you don't have to bring this into the school building. You don't have to ask your teacher because, like many occupations, a teacher is just a messenger, a conduit. They're not the end all be all. So a lot of times these things and these discussions come up because people will go back to school and they say, "Hey, my mother told me this documentary, Miss Skavinsky or whatever. Is this true?" And then that's when the problems come. So the word I have for that is tact, of knowing, what to ask, what not to ask, when to ask, and when not to ask it. Certain things don't need to leave the house. The family knows these things. We as a community know these things. And when you try to merge the two in that way, that's when your problems come. So I feel like, as parents, it is your duty to, you are the one that when your child has that question of, "Hey, mom," like for example, when I saw Emmett Till's picture, my mother said she knew it was time to tell me what was really going on. I was about maybe 8 or 9 when I saw that. So you have to wait and show tact with your own child and wait until they come to you with those questions before you put it on them. Because you don't want to overwhelm them, but yet you do want to inform them. So my advice would be to wait until they're ready. And once they're ready, then you start spoon feeding them information about things. And like I said before, put the filter on them. You don't have to go tell them everything that I'm telling you. Yep. That's what I would say for that.
Thank you.
Yes. Well,
Dr. Sonia Johnson, your thoughts?
Um, I definitely do believe it should start at home, and I do believe at an early age. I'm a collector of children's books. I've been collecting them for over years, and I've really been more into self-awareness books for brown babies, Black and brown babies. So I picked up a book the other day about Harriet Tubman. It's truly a baby's book, but when they talk about Harriet Tubman, they're not showing the pictures of slaves being beaten or blood and whelps, but they were basically said the slaves, they were mistreated by people and she helped them get freedom up north. So it's still telling the history,
yep.
and it's not running away from it, but it's giving it to in a bite-sized pieces where they can understand. And it pains me so much where I've met, like I stated earlier, people like, I don't want to talk to my children about that. I don't want to keep feeding them gore on these tragic stories or these trauma tales. But that's our reality. We can't expect our children to believe that we were skipping and singing Jubilee in the cotton field. We had a great time. I mean, let's be real. Like,
Yeah.
we need to tell the truth. We hide behind the stories, and that's when we have these distorted images of our history. We're not saying glorified and just be, it's something we just got to be pounded into us, but we need to be aware. We need to be aware we know where we came from, we can find ways to make it better. And yes, there's other outside sources, like you said, especially with Make It Great Again and all these other things, and people feeling, and I'm not going to say people just having more courage to let their racism show, but we got to be able to know things are it's just history still reliving, still repeating itself, and be able to stand tall. Like, I know where we came from, I know where we've been through, I know what tools we have in us to press through.
Yes.
Our parents were the ones marching. Our parents were the ones with nonviolence. And a lot of people say that still is not the way it is, but we need to know there are always ways to get around this. We've done before, we can definitely do it again. So start at an early age. Like you say, you don't want little Malik going punch in his fix at school, but he needs to be instilled in us. Like, I know what I came from. I know how I'm worked.
Yes.
Definitely powerful discussion. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Another question. We as a panel know the importance of writing to express ourselves. What advice would you give parents to encourage their children to write? And I will start with Mr.
Who you said? You said me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I would say, as a child, that a lot of times, I thought I had like a speech impediment coming up because, as my dad would say, you burn the rubber up here, slow down, so you can get it out. So I learned that writing was the one way I can get everything out without anybody interrupting me, anybody telling me I'm wrong, or anybody, you know, sharing their opinion. That's the one way that I can communicate. And I like to tell my students that I said, remember now, you can do a lot of things to yourself, right? And you may lose the ability to speak, but once if you have that power of that pen, you can always write out your words, and somebody else can read them for you. You know what I mean? You know, and I often tell them that literacy and richness of your literacy accuracy helps you, with the level of success that you may achieve. Because now there are stories of people who are illiterate or near illiterate who did become successes, but somebody near them was a literary scholar. They had scholars around them in some way, because once you learn that language and vocabulary, the power of those two, and you realize that that's your sword, because we as black people, a lot of times, especially as we're discussing through history, we couldn't physically fight back with our hands, so we had to fight with our pens and pencils. And I feel like I often tell my students that this is your one tool that they can't take from you, because once you write something down, it's for real. It gives you want to get even deeper than that on the energetic metaphysical level. It's not really a goal until you write it down. So I believe, in the seriousness of it, and I try to tell them, to make sure that they understand that, like I said, that's a powerful tool to always be able to speak your truth.
Thank you.
Well,
Dr. Yvonne Johnson.
I believe that you can try to encourage them to just use another form of expressing themselves. If they had a bad day, put in writing if they don't feel like expressing it. So just encouraging them to put their thoughts into writing.
Yes. Mr. Kawanamaya.
Well, I definitely think you have to have a love of listening. You have to be able to listen. You have to have something in that mind to be able to bring something out to write. And then you yourself must, like Barry White say, you got to practice what you preach. So you have to have a love of reading. You have to be the first example. And from there, I would say, as a child, I'll just speak from my own experience. As a child, I did not want to read. My father had to actually enforce giving me books and have a routine of, I think Dr. Yvonne said this earlier, talking about the book report. My father would have a list of books that I would have to read for the month, and I would have to, after reading the book, have to write a book report, and I would even have to show him the words that I learned. I would have to highlight words that I didn't know and write the definition. I would have to show him the words and the book report, what I learned. And from that experience over the years, I remember him saying, there's a purpose behind this. And the purpose was to actually get me into, to personally start to like reading. And it eventually happened, come middle school. I believe I was reading either Lord of the Flies by William Golding or Night by Eli Wiesel, and it all clicked. And then I just started to read books on my own. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe.
Yeah.
And I started to find authors. Chinua Achebe I started to actually follow because I liked his style of writing. So for parents, I definitely will let them know that it's not an easy cakewalk. Kids aren't going to naturally just say, hey, I like to read. You're going to have to actually set up the apparatus and enforce it. And then, you will lead them to where they'll go. Eventually, they'll get the concept.
Thank you. Dr. Sonia Johnson.
To encourage students to want to write, I was just basically kind of like Yvonne said, just have them to write down their thoughts, their ideas. I remember early on, I had my own little diary. I would write letters to myself and just things like that, just to express myself. I started writing little short stories and things I dreamt about, speeches. I wrote my valedictorian speeches. So just writing stuff down. But and also kind of piggyback what everybody's saying about reading. One thing I did with my students years ago when I was in the classroom is we had something called Stop Everything and Read. And what I did was drop everything and read. And what I would do was I would go to the library and find books about topics that they were into, like things that were related to what they had in their everyday life, things that kind of mimic their what they're going through, because that interests them. And that encouraged them to want to read more. Not that I encouraged some of those lifestyles, but it made them want to read. For 30 minutes every week, I got them quiet and we were all reading. They were like, give me some more. What we reading next? So just kind of like it was stated, just to kind of see what your children are into, what's their interest. It could be Lord of the Flies, Harry Potter, Babysitter Club. I don't care. Read your name if you're interested in it. But just something, to just piggyback, just get them interested in learning. And and also, even I hate to say this, you have a lot of young men that say they want to be rappers. Well, one time I told them, I said, okay, you want to learn about rap? This is a book about Ice Cube. Read that. You got to realize Jay-Z writes his own lyrics. Go ahead, show me if you think you tough, your lyrics, show me your game. How you can beat him, do it. And they get their minds and wheels ticking. They not realize they writing, but they are. So.
Yep. And most rappers are avid readers.
Exactly. And they don't want to hear that part. Lil Jon had a whole degree, but they don't want to hear that part.
Chemist.
Thank you. And now we're on to our last question. What projects would you like to share with our audience? Starting with Mr. Johnny Faison.
Well, I would like to share, first off, I do have, as we're talking about literacy, I have children's books on Amazon. If you just, type my name in, and you can find them on there. I also am working with an organization called The Brainery. And what it is a homeschool organization that offers services for children from ages 5 all the way up through high school. And what they do is they give you a place to come. We design the lessons for them. We, deliver the lessons to them, and then they do the work at home. And along the way, they compile a portfolio of their work. So when that school, system comes to do their check, they say, hey, I have my work right here. And, if you want to look into that, you can find the Brainerd Experience online. And if I'm not mistaken, now I deal with the ECE wing of it, but up in the high school, I know they have kids from out of state, from North Carolina and South Carolina in the program. So I believe that they take kids nationwide, and you can find them. Like I said, go to Google, Facebook, look up the Brainerd Experience, and they have a website called it's www.thebraineryexperience.com. That's what I'm pushing out for this year.
Right. Sounds exciting. Thank you for sharing
Yes.
that. Dr. Yvonne Johnson.
I would just like to share Manifested Dreams. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or www.therideofpride1.com. It's kind of coincides with what we were talking about because it's a family story. They researched their history back 150 years, and it gives a personal um, perspective of each character. It talks about um, when when slavery ended. Talks about the Memphis massacre, the Red Summer, Ida B. Wells. It talks about the integration of Memphis city schools, the just every several events during that 150 time span. And similar to what Johnny talked about, it is odd that you said you found a box. So that's how the family found their history, uh, searching through their grandmother's stuff. So they found several stories
Yeah.
about history, and it gives their personal experience throughout those 150 years. So that's the main thing I'm pushing at this present time, the manifested dreams.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kaunamaiwu.
Mhm. I definitely will be pushing my previous work. I usually do every 4 years a reference material, and I do a census for not only Black Americans in North America, but all of the countries in North America, Central America, and South America. And I do an additional census for Africans on the continent, and I basically just uh, accumulate a ton of information, and then I put it out as reference so that people could, take the information and draw whatever conclusions that they need to make. So I would like to promote that, but I would also like to promote my upcoming writing, which I should be finishing this month, which is the Tales of King Odun. And it's a story that comes from one of my ancestors, one of my forefathers in my direct line. And essentially, he was he was a African king who participated in all the things that kings do, but one of the things that he dealt with was slavery and selling slaves. So I thought that it would be a great story to bring to African Americans, because they always hear about the role that the European plays, but they don't hear about the role that Africans play. Europeans couldn't get a slave unless they went to an African. And the story essentially talks about what happens to King Odun when the Spanish and the Portuguese start to explore the coast where we were, and they essentially started to arm other tribes, and what my ancestor did in response to that. And the story also has a number of other folklores from the area that I, just kind of wrote down, and there'll be basically a series of it. So the Legend of King Odun is what it's called.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Sonia Johnson.
All right, so I want to share the book my sister and I both wrote, The Ride of Pride. As we mentioned earlier, it's about African American inventions, and it's telling the story of a young man named Jaden Anderson who did not want to do his work. It was a homework project that he was given to us by his teacher, and his father and his mother kind of get together and brainstorm and make it like an adventure around the city, showing him different inventions that were invented by African Americans, and basically take him on a ride of pride. So this is a true family project, because my sister and I, like I stated, we are the authors, and our father did all the illustrations. So we definitely want it's a family project, and I've been toying back with writing a story that's loosely, well, I can't even say loosely, largely based off my life, but I'm kind of waiting for the ending to change before I start writing it. So right now I don't like endings. So,
Not just yet.
so I'm trying to wait till the ending gets a little bit better before I start putting pencil to paper. But I might go ahead and just start writing the beginning and just leave the ending for a little later before I publish. So that's what I'm working on. But we can find our book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and also the website www.thewriterpride1.com.
Right. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna need a copy
Thank
of
you.
the book.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your projects and for joining me tonight on this endeavor. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Let's do it again.
Oh yeah.
And I definitely hope you enjoy your evenings. And definitely have a good week.
Oh, for sure.
All right, you
too.
too. Y'all too.
Thank you. It's
All right,
nice
nice meeting everybody now.
Nice to meet you all as well.
It's a great panel.
I'll be ordering those books. Manifesting
for sure.
Writer Pride.
Because I want to hear about that Red Summer.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I know things, but I want to, I like this. As you said, I like history. So,
And it's amazing. I know the panel's over. I was reading an excerpt from Yvonne's book to some students, and one of the young ladies whose father was one of the ones who integrated Memphis City Schools. So she was able to be like, yeah, you're talking about that. So it's amazing how people can definitely connect these incidents and these events because they know people who lived it, who experienced it. So that's what makes it really enriching.
And that's why they don't want these things talked about in schools because they know that it's going to become a major discussion at home, at dinner table.
Yes.
Nana, they did what? To who? Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so it's like a flip side. Like you said, I don't know if it's a guilt thing or they want to dim our light. They don't want to know what we overcame in the several accomplishments. Yeah. So I said, don't dim my light. Let me shine.
Yeah. Big facts. Big facts.
Yeah.